A lot of T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, Trey Hendrickson talk, Duke Tobin addressing the media yesterday. But those are like the big storylines, the big question marks heading in. But we also have the draft coming up. That's the whole reason that they're there at the combine is, of course, to evaluate some of college football's biggest talent that's going to be, obviously all the teams going after with the draft gets here coming up in April. So with the draft coming up, there's just a lot of things that this team's going to be looking at and how to fix some holes and patch some holes on the defensive side of the ball, whether it be through free agency or the draft. Elliot, you came across a clip, of course, that is more centered around how they're going to focus on improving the defense.
Well, it's not really. I mean, it's Duke Tobin discusses the defense here, but it's also about the Bengals in general not coming up in big moments. So it's not specifically centered around the defense, but it's going to be the Cincinnati Bengals, moving forward, having to execute, and it starts with the defense. So this is Duke Tobin.
We already have. We know our defense wasn't good enough. It couldn't get stops when we needed it, couldn't protect leads, it didn't get off the field, and then, in critical moments when the game was on the line, it didn't rise to the occasion. 4th and 16 against Kansas City, that's one play, we win one game, now we're in the playoffs. But that's countless games throughout the year, whether it's our offense converting a first down to run the clock out to win the game, whether it's our special teams converting a field goal to win the game, but multiple times, a fumble going into the end zone, all the things that happened. It was a crazy year. We're a championship level team that didn't get an opportunity, and that irritates us. It irritates all of us. It irritates our fans, and we're not happy about it. And we're going to attack the offseason to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, and I think it starts with the defense, right? I mean, flat out, it was bad. It was a bad year. Yeah. It's the reason the Bengals aren't in the playoffs. He mentioned all the little plays there. The fumble out of the back of the end zone, or the fumble in the end zone week 1 against the Patriots, the pass interference against the Chiefs. All these things, the missed field goals by Evan McPherson against the Ravens, all these little things were symptoms of the disease. The disease, unfortunately, this year for the Bengals was just a defense that wasn't professional. It wasn't a good enough defense. It wasn't a standard NFL defense. And that was the borderline issue. So I think going forward, they're going to take a look at everything, and it's going to start there, and they're going to try to address it. They're going to address it. They've got Al Golden. They've fired Lou Anarumo. The defense is going to look different this year. So when the Bengals have the little plays that don't go our way, it's not season-ending. Because that's what it was. Every little play ended the Bengals' season last year, and I don't think that's supposed to go, or that's not how it's supposed to go, right? Every team messes up. Every team loses games. It's very rare to have a perfect season. And even when you have a perfect season, you still don't win it all. Shout out to the Patriots. But it's like, I think if you can adjust the defense just to a point where I can look at them and be like, okay, they can get like back-to-back stops once in a game. If they can do that once. There were multiple games where the defense legitimately didn't get a stop. The Washington Commanders were stopped 0 times when they beat the Bengals this year. 0. You know how hard that is? Not to get one single stop if you don't count the kneel out to end the half. That's brutal. So you start there, and everything else gets better based off of that. And I think that's my takeaway from what he just said.
Those organizational changes didn't stop with Duke Tobin. Zac Taylor was asked about that as well, and he said that the slow starts are an inexcusable problem, something that has obviously happened year in and year out under him, except for the year we made it to the Super Bowl where they won in week 1. And he said that they're going to look at the entire offseason plan, the preseason plan, the spring plan, every single aspect of the offseason, overhaul it and change how they approach that. So I thought that was good as well, because even over the last few years when the slow starts have been a problem, since they haven't really affected us, I think we haven't seen the change that is necessary to change that around. But since it kept us out of the playoffs this year, we're going to see change to the offseason plan. At least that's what Zac Taylor's saying in February. We'll see how much that matters when we get to week 1, week 2, week 3. But hopefully that's going to allow the Bengals to start the season a little faster and not have a week 1 loss to the Patriots, keep you out of the playoffs.
They legitimately have to.
Yeah.
I'm sick and tired of the 1-3 starts, the 0-2 start. You got to start hot. I know Jacob and I think Reed, maybe Casey even said, before this year, like, we can lose a couple games early. Like, that's not going to kill our year.
Because almost didn't, too.
Because we know the Cincinnati Bengals get hot at the end. We know that. This year was the reason why you have to start hot. You cannot lose to the New England Patriots, who don't have a team, in week 1 at home. It's inexcusable. You can't defend it. And honestly, I think it should have been enough to warrant some more change than it did, than just our DC this year. So Next year, I don't know why they can't handle any distraction whatsoever. Other teams are able to do it. The Kansas City Chiefs and Chris Jones were having arguments and contract disputes, and what happens? They go out and they win their games. The Bengals don't win games when there's any sort of adversity in the first few weeks of the season. It just hasn't happened. Last year, you didn't know what was going to go on with Jamar Chase, and I think it really, really hurt them. I think it was bad for the morale of the team. A couple years ago, you have Joe Burrow injury, and that's a way more fair argument to not start out hot. But at the end of the day, good teams find ways to win, and the Bengals haven't done that under Zac Taylor in those first few weeks. They do it later on, maybe better than any team in the NFL. They do it later on. But they got to start doing it early. You have to take the pressure off the bank. You have to take the pressure off everybody. Just start out hot one time.
I've leaned towards putting less blame on Zac Taylor for those starts, even though his head will roll if they start out slow again. I know the Joe Burrow injury, and this is not blaming Joe Burrow, it's Joe Burrow's fault. Joe Burrow has come into every season limited on any participation in camp, and I know he participated in preseason last year, but that wrist still wasn't right. And when that wrist got healthy, that's when everything took off. I think it's a much simpler problem. I do think it's one thing that is being overblown a bit, because Joe Burrow starts out slow every year, as the team does, but I think it's a lot because of his ability, coming into a season, trying to get acclimated, coming off of limitations in camp, or, even still nursing a little bit of an injury. Obviously, that wrist didn't feel good until a couple weeks into the season, and that's really when the offense opened up. So I think as long as he's healthy heading into this upcoming season, I think you're not going to see a slow start. The only thing that could also lead to another slow start will be the things we're talking about now with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and Trey Hendrickson. We could talk about them getting this done, and we're assuming this is going to be done within a month. What if not? What if Jamar Chase is going to be the highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL? I believe that's going to happen. So do you guys. But what if there's just some X's and O's that need to be ironed out in these details, and it bleeds deep into July, and then camp's there, and Jamar's like, I'm not stepping foot on that field until this is done, right? It's very important that Duke Tobin, we could blame Zac Taylor if there's a slow start coming up, but I'm going to blame Duke Tobin and company, because if T is sitting out, if Trey Hendrickson is sitting out, if Jamar Chase is close to getting a deal done but opts to sit out because they haven't got it done yet, that to me is on Duke Tobin in the front office, because he just made it point blank clear. All these things that they are very confident that they can get done, low dead cap, plenty of money to spend. They want to sign all these guys to extensions. If they don't get it done, it's just simply on them. And if those distractions lead to a slow start, I have a hard time putting that on Zac Taylor. That has to be on the front office at that point. But we know how that game rolls. It'll be on Zac Taylor one way or another.
Yeah, you can't fire Mike Brown, so we'll fire Zac Taylor.
That's correct. Some other news just came out. And this speaks to maybe.
Before we move off the combine,
okay, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
Duke Tobin had another quote at the meeting. We talked about the combine, what they're looking for, what they're approaching in the draft, the focus at pick 17, and we've seen as their meetings start to roll in today, at least this part of what he said yesterday is true and is being confirmed by the meetings they're having so far. Duke Tobin emphasized that get off time and having a pass rush plan is what they're most focused and looking for when they look at the edge rushers. He included that second moves might even be more important than first moves, and how you attack after your first one does not work. If they follow that process, some big names that we've talked about so far would be knocked off their board. Mykel Williams, Shamar Stewart really don't fit those two molds, but some smaller guys might, which goes against the size profile that the Bengals have attacked over the last few drafts. That's how you end up with guys like Miles Murphy and Sam Hubbard, the bigger body edge rushers that the Bengals think are more NFL ready right away, instead of the more gadget small guys that the Bengals have avoided, like the Nolan Smith that we've seen have a lot of success elsewhere. One guy that does really fit this mold for the Bengals, going off of what Duke Tobin said they're looking for most, is the Texas A&M edge, Nick Scorton. A lot of people don't necessarily love him because he had a down year in production last year in College Station, but 2 years ago he transferred from Purdue, and today during a combine interview he said the way that they're asked to play the two different schools couldn't be more different. Texas A&M is more read and react and no pure rush, where Purdue was pure rush. He had a great season of production in 2023 at Purdue, so maybe a more exciting player than initially thought of, but he fits that Bengals mold pretty well based off what Duke Tobin's saying there. And outside of just him, the Bengals have met with Shamar Stewart, a fellow Texas A&M Aggie, Mykel Williams from Georgia, James Pierce Jr. from Tennessee, Mike Green from Marshall, and Colin Oliver from Oklahoma State. All the top edge rushers being met with by the Bengals right now. They have not met with Jack Sawyer yet. Thought that was important to note because we talked about him a little bit as well. well going through this draft season, but focusing on the edge position, at least at the top of the draft at 17. So at least early in the draft process, seems like that's the way they're leaning. They're going to attack defense at 17, which again leads me to believe if they're focusing on defense at 17, T. Higgins is going to be back in Cincinnati.
Cap.
Fair enough. Just wait 4 hours and tweet it.
Let me ask you guys this. Is it still, and this is more for Jacob and Casey, is it still a complete mystery what the Bengals are going to draft with that pick in the first round?
Yeah.
Because I think that you have an idea, but then it's like if Duke Tobin is quote-unquote cap about T. Higgins, about what he said, I still think you need a wide receiver as a first priority. And I still think you might need a tight end with your first priority, depending on what you do with Mike Gesicki. And obviously we don't have those answers yet. We'll know more about that obviously come April. It's only February right now. So, but are you confident with what direction they're going for that first pick in the first round, or for the first round pick?
I mean, these combine meetings showed a lot last year. They met with a lot of the tackles, and they met with a lot of the defensive linemen. They ended up going tackle. Right now, all we've seen is defense.
Right.
I have not seen one offensive player met yet.
They haven't had interviews yet. So
Yeah, that's true as well. But as of right now, they have, I think I saw 45 of those interviews, and you have to interview not just the first round, but the whole draft. So they've already used at least 6 to 8 on the D line in the first round alone.
And
so
7 of those 8 are first-round D-line prospects.
Right.
Like, they're not going deep into the draft yet, even. So that's another reason why I feel like they're really honed in there for 17, at least as of now.
Yeah. And the other thing, too, that you could point to that I know that they haven't said, but it's kind of self-explanatory, you want to get younger on defense. The last year's defense was really old, so I'm assuming that they're looking at the draft to answer those questions.
And financially, you have to. Charlie wrote about it today, Goldsmith on Charlie's chalkboard, that if the Bengals are going to pay Jamar and Joe and T what we're asking them to pay them, you don't have an option but to get young on defense. We talk about what the Eagles have done, and every time we bring it up, I make sure to say it because it's important, and I feel like it gets glossed over. 8 of their 11 starters on defense are on rookie contracts. You can't pay everyone unless you hit in the draft.
Yeah.
Those things are one and one. They go together. You have to marry the draft, free agency, and contracts in order to be a legitimate Super Bowl contender. So the Bengals have to change how they draft if they're going to be a legitimate contender with these big contracts. And I think my biggest thing for the draft, and what I say all the time, is you can't go in with the position. That is the worst way you can handle the draft, is say we are going to draft an edge rusher at 17. And then in the first 16 picks, 5 edge rushers go, and you're stuck with the 6th best guy. You have to let the board fall, take the best player at a position you can at least tell yourself, I need a little bit, and make the team better. I'm all for drafting the best guy, especially defensively this season when we're trying to get young really across the board. And we don't have anyone outside of, I guess I'd say Logan Wilson that I believe in super long-term on this defense. So I would be fine drafting anyone at any position. We've seen over the last couple of weeks, Will Johnson, the Michigan corner, tumbling down boards because of the lack of confidence in his ability to test at both Pro Day and the Combine. So a guy that was a consensus top 5 pick going into the year, if we can get a glorified cornerback 1 at 17, we haven't talked about DB much at all outside of free agency, but if the board falls that way, maybe you jump on that. You said tight end, Tyler Warren. We're not talking about tight end, but if he falls out of the top 10, maybe you jump on him. So you got to be willing to take whatever the best player is. That's the only way you can improve your team.